Click. And we're live. It is Wednesday, December 8th, 2021, 5 o'clock p.m. Our guest has vanished in a puff of smoke. We're going to try to bring him back.
A puff of poodle hair.
A puff of poodle hair. But while we're bringing him back, I'm gonna tell you the story of Fluffy Poodle Shirt, which has now arrived. The good folks at Clothing Monster came through. The other day, I got a UPS shipping notification, and Fluffy Poodle Shirt is here, as ridiculous as expected.
It's not that ridiculous. I don't think it's that bad. Hi, Pete. It's not that bad, Ben. I know that like Pete has to take issue with
Pete,
dog
you gotta
shirts
unmute
generally.
yourself. You don't think it's bad?
No, I don't think it's nearly as.
See, Pete now is here, but he can't unmute
I kind
himself.
of like this. I like
This is
the
Pete's doing
pantomiming.
mime. Pete, refresh
Pete
your
Strzok.
screen. Refresh your screen. This shouldn't be that hard. You're becoming turning into
God.
Sarah Longwell, where
No, that's audio issues, Ben. Like,
well, we're having audio issues with him
I
right
guess
now.
that's true. But it's because of muting.
I do want to point out to everyone who is pointing this out that no, Fluffy Poodle Shirt is not nipply. And that should be reassuring to Virginia Heffernan.
I think it should be reassuring to Pete too. I'm not understanding why he finds
Pete's
it so.
issues with Fluffy Poodle Shirt, with dog shirts, were never really about their nippliness. I think they really.
I can't imagine that wasn't at least part of the calculus. I mean, it is like one of the most distinctive parts of
let's ask
the dog shirts.
Once we can get him to, maybe if we
is
have
the eye
Pete,
placement.
Okay, unmute
He's
yourself
muted.
now, Strzok. Do you know how to do that? No, you're still muted.
Why can't you unmute him, Ben?
I can't. It doesn't work.
Oh my God.
No, it's one of the things about being muted, Pete, is that we can't hear you.
I think
So maybe we should do this whole conversation in yeses and nos. Can you hear us?
Hey, Pete, what do you think of Ben's poodle shirt? Oh. Hi, Ben.
Hi, KK. How are you? What do you think? You think the Fluffy Poodle Shirt is just boring?
I do a little bit, honestly. I mean, it just like lacks the.
Pete is now unmuted.
Hi, Pete.
Hello,
I
Pete
can hear you.
Strzok.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can.
I blame the damn dog. You know what the dog looks like, Ben? The poodle. I've said this now 7 times, and half my margarita is gone out of frustration, and I blame all of this. The first 4 minutes of technical difficulty on that dog. It looks like the giant tip of a Q-tip split from which the nose of this dog is emerging. Sort of like
that makes it much more
that opening
interesting
scene
now
of
that I'm
Alien, where
imagining
the alien is bursting forth from. We just had a meal on the deck of the grimy spaceship, and Ben's laughing, and then all of a sudden he starts, and this dog is now emerging from his abdomen.
That's what's actually happening.
Well, it's what the dark voices in my head say, Ben. No, that's no.
But I find it to be like less. I find it to be less. I don't know. I do agree with you. It does look like that. Like, you're not wrong.
Fred's point in the chat that this comment might say more about Pete than about the dog shirt.
Yeah, this is the
everybody
entire
doesn't see darkness like aliens splitting. Yeah,
but
maybe.
Ben, this is the entire idea of dog shirt as Rorschach test that we've discussed numerous times on the show.
Well, Shoebill Shirt also showed up today, and so I think you're all like we're and now, as I promised Clothing Monster, we're putting in a new order now as soon as Fluffy Poodle Shirt arrived. So we're going to order Corn on the Cob shirt and Bison shirt and Sloth shirt. We're diversifying. but we can't have
Does
fun
Tammy
anymore.
ever consider like taking your credit card away? Like I just
Tammy knows that there are certain things in a marriage that are just non-negotiable, like dog shirts.
Have you, by the way, speaking of other means of generating income, have you seen and had access to or set up this new tip jar that Twitter is doing?
No. You mean people can tip me on Twitter?
Yeah.
That seems really ridiculous to me because...
Why? You're a content creator, Ben.
No, I'm a shit poster mostly.
Yeah, but someone might want it. But come on. Like you can so now you can literally click on this little button next to my name and Venmo me some amount of money. This would have been more useful when I was taking on Hertz than after taking on Hertz.
Can I click on a button on Twitter and demand money from you? Because that would be really useful if I could go to Rick Grinnell's Twitter feed and
I want
there are other
money.
Ben.
I
there
want
are other sites
$5
for
of my
that.
life back.
Which Rick Grinnell may be on, but leaving that whole line of conversation alone.
Yeah. No, I think that's so. Anyway, all of this is a very long way of saying that we are not allowed to have fun anymore. But we are allowed to have P. Alley, a.k.a. Peter Strzok, former, guy who did things in government, now current guy who does things outside of government. And Pete, you are have been watching Tucker Carlson. And so I guess the first question I have is, what sin did you commit in that you have been sentenced by what competent authority to spend any of your time watching Tucker Carlson? And I just want to say Tucker was invited on the show today to rebut Peter or respond in any way he saw fit. He did not respond to the tweet from the In Lieu of Fun Twitter feed saying that he's welcome here. Tucker, if you're in the Greek chorus, speak up. We'll bring you on screen. You're welcome anytime.
So it was actually, it popped up on my Twitter feed. Some Caroline, or I think she's married now, so has a hyphenated last name, but does research on sort of social media, misinformation, disinformation space on the more academic data side of things, but had posted a series of screen grabs of Tucker's show last night, which essentially sounded like a greatest hits of Russian and before that Soviet propaganda about their peaceful intentions towards Ukraine and why the West would ever want to, be what's, and I think the screen grabs, there were a series as he was talking about what and why on earth the United States would want to involve itself in Ukraine. There are a series of chyrons at the bottom. One, NATO seems to exist to torment Putin. Another one, how would intervening in Ukraine help U.S.? And then a third, Putin just wants to keep his western border secure. And I don't know that first of all, I've never seen any major U.S. broadcaster ever take that tone, even in an opinion piece, in such a shockingly consistent pro-Russian, almost to the point of laughably propagandist sort of statements. And then in my high dudgeon, I started looking around for Tucker's other history. And what I hadn't realized, I had remembered, and I wrote about it in my book, when Donald Trump gave that crazy statement when he was being interviewed about Montenegro and about the Montenegrins being a very aggressive people, and they get angry and all of a sudden you're in World War III, and why on earth would we ever want to come to the Montenegrins' defense? And two observations to that. First is there's no goddamn way in hell that Trump could find Montenegro on a map. I mean, there's no chance that could exist. And so the question is, well, who's putting this thought in his head? Why is it that he came to say Montenegro, aggressive people, we're in World War III if they do something? And as I was looking last night, I said, well, holy crap, that was a Tucker Carlson interview. And so Tucker Carlson asked him in the context of Montenegro, well, I don't see why my son should go, need to fight there, I think, or something to that effect. And Trump responded the way he did. And so there's this pattern of these wildly pro-Russian sentiment statements that are coming out that in some ways don't make a lot of sense to me, in a lot of ways don't make a lot of sense to me, and seem to revolve around Tucker Carlson for whatever reason. And I don't know, is this just an outgrowth of his, some deeply held isolationist belief that we really shouldn't be, focused on exporting democracy abroad, which is kind of what I thought a lot of conservatism, at least when I was growing up, stood for. But and I don't know to what extent the Murdoch empire is either encouraging this and or just because Tucker's such a rainmaker for them, letting it go. But it was a disappointing thing last night, and just I don't understand why we're at the point we are at where the Republican Party has cozied up as much as it has to Russia. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, nowadays, the Democrats, they're socialists, they're communists. So they, there's this schizophrenia going on the right fringe of the Republican Party, which may not be the fringe anymore, that, they can't decide whether Russia's good or bad and socialism or communism are good or bad. They probably don't know what any of those actually mean. But as a talking point, there's this very schizophrenic, Russia, they're good white Christians like us, and Putin is just an admirable strongman, or, communism and socialism bad, and that's the squad, and we should stay away from it, and they're going to make, they're going to take over everything, and we'll all be communists if we don't watch ourselves. But it's a very odd thing, and it was, again, just for me to see that last night, just, I'm increasingly getting very antsy and angry about where I think the country is going. And I think, I mentioned I was texting with Ben looking at Bart Gellman had a great essay in The Atlantic saying things that a lot of us have been saying, but Bart writes and speaks very, very well and eloquently, and essentially talking about the radical efforts underway to undo our democracy, particularly when it comes to voting, and to the extent that 2020 was a dry run for future electoral, not just shenanigans, but future insurrection. And what bothers me the most, and what I've become increasingly aggravated with, is I get the sense of there is a feeling of lacking a sense of urgency, that people don't understand quite how bad it is and how fast things are moving. And, I'm sure folks who are, passionate about climate change have probably felt that way for a while. But, I always assumed, in the Army and the FBI, there was always the sense of, having a sense of urgency was like, to not do that was a cardinal sin. Like, if you don't move, particularly post 9/11, if you don't do something, the costs are so high and the consequences so large, you have to approach things with just this constant sense of a continual pressure to advance and resolve and do, because not to do that, terrible things would happen. And I increasingly kind of am looking at our domestic environment and increasingly feeling that way. And the only people that seem to care are the ones who are energized on the far right. And I don't know. I'm frustrated. I'm nervous. I am, and I tweet and people ask the relevant question. Okay, well, you got us scared, great, but what should we do? And what should we do? Go out and vote. I mean, I'm in Virginia. Terry McAuliffe lost to Youngkin, and some of the best data I've seen after the fact. It wasn't that he won all these swing voters. It wasn't that he, took all these people who had voted for Biden. It was just that the people who were Trump supporters got out, and the people who supported Biden didn't. It's just
or did, just not at the same.
Not at the same volume, right? So that engagement, right? That's absolutely right, Ben. So the engagement, you had a very dedicated far right-wing base acting with a sense of urgency, acting that this matters, that this is critical, that they're going to make the effort to do it, and a comparatively greater sense of apathy. And I don't know how, folks will say, well, just sounding the alarm, that doesn't do anything. Well, how else to overcome apathy? And I don't know the answer to that, but I see a tremendous amount of apathy. And I know, and this spreads out to, people frustrated with the Department of Justice and the pace of the investigations into January 6th, or whether or not anything's being done to look at investigations of criminal wrongdoing of the Trump administration, and what the January 6th committee is doing, and whether or not they are actually going to get anywhere by the midterm elections, and when they split for break before, if it flips, that new group is sworn in. And Mark Meadows now essentially saying fuck you to the committee after playing footsie with him, knowing full well that, whether or not intentional, he's just drawn out that game such that I think he can play it and never have to testify. So again, to that sense of, do people understand the gravity of what we're facing? If they do, I don't think that is translating to a sense of urgency that is merited. And I don't know how to, other than,
I have to say, so let's just say, like, for example, that I understand that this seems incredibly urgent to you. Let's say that, like, hypothetically speaking, this doesn't seem as urgent to me. And in fact, that, for example, things like the loss of Roe seem incredibly urgent, or other types of kind of like restrictions on. So like, there's a couple of things. One is which, like, in a world in which you're not in the army and like you cannot stand up and like kind of go and actually do something, or it's unclear what it is you might be doing if you were going to do something, the attention and the time and the panic that people decide to kind of, they have a limited, like, you have a limited amount of panic that you can give to like any type of thing. Everything can't be the thing that makes you kind of stand up and do something. So I'm curious, like, why this thing, and what is so impending about it that makes you so certain versus like any other domestic concern or anything else?
Kid, I think it's the same thing at the end of the day. I think we're talking about an effort underway to undermine our democracy in the most fundamental sense of that term, such that the people who are elected and are certified into those elections do not represent the popular vote. And what concerns me when I see all this kind of jiggering of state election boards and concerns about whether or not they would actually, put forth electors in the presidential sense that do not represent the results of that state election, I don't know what happens if that occurs. But I think, to your point about Roe, and Ben, rely on you for this. I mean, like, what is the best polling data about the percentage of Americans who believe that abortion should be safe and lawful for women to have access? I think it was in the mid 60%.
It totally depends how you ask the question. It'll vary a lot, but it's a solid majority.
But so that solid majority are facing, to Kate's point, I think a very real likelihood that, if not Roe, some of the related abortion-related holdings are going to be struck down, and you're going to have states independently implementing restrictive laws. Now, how does that relate to this? That relates to this because if you can imagine an election where Hillary Clinton won instead of Donald Trump won, well then how does the Supreme Court look in that case? I mean, we've got three? How many? 3 or 4? How many justices did Trump appoint to the Supreme Court? 3, right?
3.
So, that, and if you go forward and you say, okay, well then what if this election then comes up and the election is undermined to the extent that, again, we have Republicans taking over state boards and legitimate voiced reasonable concerns that even if the state voted a slate of Democratic electors that the state board might forward Republican ones, well then how does that impact the Supreme Court justices? How does that impact justices that are being appointed to circuit courts of appeal and district courts? How does that look in all the state after state after state if the Supreme Court returns, and let's say, well, it's a state issue, let them decide what the laws are. Well, how are those state, legislatures and state judicial bodies being formed? And are they being formed in a way that represents, an actual democratic result or image?
So I want to, we've come a long way in a small number of minutes from Tucker. And I want to explore the connective tissue between the observations about Tucker Carlson that started you down this doom-casting spiral and the substance of the doom-casting. Tucker Carlson has a Vladimir Putin fetish, apparently, and a he's just a nice man who is concerned about the Western Western Russian border thing, and he sounds like a fellow traveler talking about the Soviet Union. Okay, what does that have to do with Glenn Youngkin?
What that has to do, I think, is that the people who are motivated the most to participate in our political process at this point are what you see in the Virginia gubernatorial race. You see the most efficient and effective mobilization in the right, and in particular the far right. And that far right consumes most of their, and Bart Gellman makes this point with a couple of vignettes of people he interviews. That population largely consumes its information about the United States and about the world from this right-wing ecosphere, where Tucker Carlson is probably the most reasonable, middle-of-the-road person you're going to find in that environment. I mean, it includes, all the OANs, and there was an astounding, I don't think it was OAN, I forget, Newsmax maybe had a magazine cover that had Putin on it, which, and I forget what the caption was, but it was similarly just astoundingly pro-Russia and bad. But the point being, as the people who are motivated to participate the most in our political process in the United States right now, the place where they are getting their information is coming from people like Tucker Carlson and others who do not have a problem with Putin, and beyond that see him as admirable. And I just, at the end of the day, I don't think it is something as sophisticated as saying, well, Putin's an autocrat and an authoritarian. He is, he's against kind of stands against the ideals of Western democracy and what we in Western Europe and the NATO alliance are trying to, encourage and advance around the world. And, therefore, I don't think anybody thinks about it that deeply. I think it is simply a function of Tucker and Fox are right. Tucker is right. Why should we do it? There was a strong isolationist bent to Trump's message in 2016. I assume that will be the same in 2020. I think Carlson is echoing that. I think there's always been, an isolationist streak in America for a long, long time. But when I see isolationism combining with condoning authoritarianism, that's really concerning. I mean, it's not like, well, we should be isolationists and let, France and Britain and Italy, and they're great, Germany, they're great, they can take care of it. It's not. It's Russia's great. And I don't know how that sort of unholy alliance came to be. And I'm sorry, my dog is going nuts downstairs. But
all right, so I want to argue you out of this. Not because I necessarily think you're wrong, but because I think you've got some unexamined assumptions here that are worth examining. And proposition number one, Glenn Youngkin does not win with Tucker Carlson viewers alone. In order to win, he has to attract a lot of mainstream people. And Glenn Youngkin, and so the fact that Tucker Carlson has a bigger problem with Joe Biden than he does with Vladimir Putin, is not by itself enough to say that there's a problem here, other than in his radicalization of a certain set of followers, as well as the moral choices that Fox News is making. But that's not the concern that you're expressing. And so my question is, we don't have any evidence that Tucker Carlson's Vladimir Putin fetish is moving any voters from a sane column, whether it's a Democratic column, to an insane Republican column, or from a sane Republican world, a sort of bulwarky kind of world, into an insane world. And so I guess my first question is, aren't you conflating two sets of variables that may be more independent than they look. So variable number one is things look pretty bad for the Democrats these days, and we may be looking at a very ugly set of midterms. And fact number two is that Tucker Carlson is saying some crazy shit. And you're kind of subconsciously assigning a little bit more cause and effect to those two things than they perhaps warrant. It's possible that they're both true and that Tucker's impact is mostly to reinforce crazy assholes in their crazy asshole views.
Yeah, and I think, the conversation hopped around, and I don't think I was trying to imply that Tucker Carlson is the reason why Youngkin got elected. I think the fact of the matter is that, McAuliffe had a lot of flaws in his campaign, and I think there were a lot of things that Youngkin did that were smart, that were simple, and that, reinforced the idea that, politics is local, and that they ran a very localized campaign in Virginia, whereas McAuliffe was much more of a national felt like a national democratic sort of set of talking points. And that is separate and distinct. I was just talking about what, to the extent, if asked, why does this matter with Tucker? It matters to Tucker that this base, but when we talk about that swing in the middle, again, it's like Clinton versus Trump. That swing in the middle shouldn't matter. Your base is what should really, call at the end of the day, and that it's the lack of motivation on the base getting out on the one side, and the base really being engaged and motivated and getting out on the other side that I think decided the Virginia gubernatorial results. But, and I completely agree with you. I don't think there's a cause and effect of Tucker's embrace of Putin, meaning that therefore this occurred. So I don't want to, if I said I didn't intend to and don't mean that there is a causal relationship there. What concerns me about Tucker is the people who are voting, the motivated base, are listening to him. And that when you look at, what Tucker is doing and kind of echoing all this Putinism, he went over and talked to Orban for a week or two, right? I mean, I thought he traveled, and so it's not just Putin. I mean, there's this fascination with, shockingly enough, very white nationalistic, authoritarian leaders other than Putin out there who he's, spent some time with. But I think the concern at the end of the day is all of these things go to, I don't know that I adhere to the idea. I have a difficult relationship with the idea of American exceptionalism. On the one hand, I believe a great deal about the democracy is the best form of governance and most fair that we've come up with in the world. But at the same time, I think it's extraordinarily arrogant to assume that the American form of governance must fit everywhere in the world. So having said that, though, I do think that this idea of what America stands for beyond the domestic civics idea, but what America stands for and should stand for in the international environment should be as a champion of democracy, should be as a champion of human rights, should be a champion of the idea that every person is entitled to their belief and their opinion, and that whether it's voting for who they want to, saying what they want to, loving who they want to, worshiping who they want to, those are ideals that we should have in America and that we should be actively encouraging abroad. And that when you get people like stinking Tucker saying, oh, well, NATO's just a thorn in Putin's side, it reduces this idea of American identity and kind of creates this equivalence, or if at least not equivalence, it removes this idea that the American experiment is something special. It removes this idea of an American identity on the global stage and what we should be standing for and what we should be willing to commit resources and lives to defending and advancing. And that's the danger, I think. I don't, at the end of the day, if you got all these, you go to January 6th and you interviewed all those people and say, well, what does America stand for? What would they say? If you ask Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz or
well, she's not coherent enough to answer that question.
Well, but when you say what does America stand for?
It stands for resistance to the Rothschild space laser, doesn't it?
I guess, but okay, great. So okay, we'll grant you. We'll go. Space Force will destroy the Jewish space laser. What does America stand for? What's their answer? I don't think you get an answer. And I don't know how.
Really? Because I think their answer probably sounds a lot like the stuff that you just said. whether or not, like, anyone can say what America stands for. Like, they can make it sound shiny and nice. There's like a difference between doing that and like actually.
But you really think if you went to any of these folks, the intelligentsia, such as it is, and said, okay, what are the American ideals that we should stand for and advance on an international environment? Some of them, well, we don't want the immigration going crazy on us, so we need strong borders.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say their conception, to the extent that we can just go by what they say, they have a very strong conception of American freedoms that are more about guns than they are.
I was just going to say that.
They're more about
They're all
guns
about, yeah.
and their own.
Well, and I would say what somebody in the course, I don't know who it is, white Christian values are, a hallmark of a lot of this.
So
could I just like interject really quickly, which is just to say that, like, I see what you're saying, but I do think that, like, in fact, what you're taking for granted is that they see any type of need to impose, like, to bring, there's no sense of kind of needing to bring there's no sense of needing to bring their values to other people, as much as there is a protection of their values at home. And like, that's why they
I think protection of values at home is a code word for losing power and influence in their environment to the other, whatever that other is. And usually it's a changing, and this is another, and like, going to Bart Gellman, read Bart Gellman's piece in The Atlantic. I want to plug it because I thought it was great. He talks about a group who is doing research, who is looking at they call them the 1/6 insurrectionists. I think that's kind of a wrong term, because I think they're only looking at the people who have been charged, not the thousands who descended on the Capitol. And they went through and they took all the data of these people who were there and being prosecuted, and they said, okay, well, it must be from really super pro-Trump voting areas of the country. Nope, that's not it. Well, they really must be from really poor white areas. Nope, that's not it. And all these assumptions about what they might be, trying to correlate with who showed up and who stormed into the Capitol, nothing made sense until the one and only thing they looked at is people who were facing a comparative decline in their position of power and influence in their communities. And where there was a delta there was a massive correlation. So people, and again, they're all white. People who are in, I mean, not all, but the overwhelming preponderance of the group, people who are in environments who saw their power being undercut, being diminished, that was the one and only sort of data point that correlated to who was showing up at the Capitol on January 6th. To the point of, like, I want my values, I think it's not so much I want my values, it's my values are under attack. And my power and my values and my ability to maintain that, I see slipping away by fill in the blank. The blacks, the Hispanics, the Jews, the whatever, the Koreans. I mean, it's anything but me, right? And so I do think there is, I do think there is both a racial and religious aspect to that it needs to be called out for what it is.
So I, first of all, agree with all of that, but I don't go from that to, I don't link that to what Tucker is saying about Putin, the fact that Glenn Youngkin won, and create a sort of a larger stew of doom, which is what you seem to be doing this week. I look at that and say, first of all, that's exactly the demographic mix that we all would have assumed. If you look at the rhetoric of this group of people over a long period of time, I mean, we know what this part of the Republican Party, which has taken over the entire Republican Party, represents. And so we are in a situation in which one of the parties represents, more or less the things it has traditionally represented, and the other abandoned traditional conservatism and represents a kind of revanchist, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly racist, quite xenophobic, isolationist authoritarianism. And in that situation, the two-party system has a kind of unhealthy quality, which is that both parties eventually lose and both parties therefore eventually win in the two-party system. And this is not a party that you can necessarily trust with power at this point. And I feel like that is the state that we've been dealing with for the last 5 or 6 years. And I'm not sure I understand why you're flipping out and panicked about it today.
Because
as opposed to, when
Because
we
I
might have, maybe when we might have needed an insurance policy, for example.
Well, there's always time for an insurance policy, Ben. That's it. Yeah. So go ahead, Kate. You said you were going to say something. I think what I am concerned about now are the things that I'm seeing in the states, and particularly at the state level, the entities that control and monitor and report the voting results, particularly of the presidential elections. I see things going on that are concerning to me in just a purely anti-democratic way, that there is the prospect, and Bart talks about this, where results which represent a democratic choice by the states, by the residents and the population of the state, may not be those which are forwarded up as the electors. And if that happens in any one state, but let alone 3 or 4 or 5, how do we respond to that? And I also see, I think there's every indication, and again, we're hopping all over the place. What concerns me, when I see Steve Bannon, 6 months, 7 months ago, he's giving an argument, and I've talked about this some elsewhere, talking about not making the mistakes of 2016 with the administration, having his cadre of shock troops ready to go, that from the jump in the next administration, they're ready to take all these Schedule C employees that don't need Senate confirmation, and they can appoint them across the realm of the government, and that in 2016, they lost time because they didn't understand all these vacancies that were there, and that they really needed to infuse selected, loyal people into those jobs to make change. That concerns me. The second thing that concerns me is I think they have come to a radical understanding that absent control over the coercive power of the state, they aren't going to be able to do what they want to do. So if you do not have the Department of Defense, if you do not have the Department of Justice and the FBI, and to a lesser extent the intelligence community and the national security apparatus, you're going to have your hands tied some. And even crazy, abusive, burn in the annals of history hell, Bill Barr had a limit to what he was willing to do for the president. And I think certainly Steve Bannon, if not sort of intuitively somewhere in Trump's, mind, he understands that we need somebody much more malleable than that at the helm of the Department of Justice and at the head of the FBI. If CIA, fine, whatever, but I mean, anybody who's carrying a gun, we want somebody there who can control it. So those things, those sort of lessons learned, that sort of understanding and acknowledgement of understanding that those were limitations, I think then, gets to a point where it adds into this concern, because things you might do to shore up against that, things like, the voting rights, the John Lewis Amendment or whatever it's called, all these things that you might be doing right now to put guardrails in place or to shore up the defenses that we have, Congress isn't doing that.
Okay,
Nobody's
but hold
talking
on.
about that.
But hold on. I'm just very confused. Do you really think, is it really, you actually think that Tucker's involvement in the things that he's saying are because of he's getting something from the Russians to say that?
I can't explain.
I don't understand how one to
and so
one.
No. This is great because it actually gets me to something where I have a professional ability to speak about it with some authority instead of talking out my ass. What I've been doing for the past 39 minutes. But from a CI perspective, I guess the question you have to ask is, how is it that there are when you look at those chyrons last night, you could not pick a better set of Russian talking points. It wasn't argumentative, it wasn't puffing up their chest, it wasn't some heavy-handed GRU hacking attempt. It was a very smooth, you might as well put the Russian ambassador talking about their what advantage does the U.S. have to defend, people of Ukraine? They're so far away. Is that really America's sons and daughters? You really want to place them for what? For this? We just want peace. I mean, it's these very polished. Who could object to that sort of point?
But why are they picking them? Why, or
well,
who is writing them? And if it's if it isn't, okay, if it's what you're saying, what it sounds like is kind of like an accidental backing in.
But why is it, is Tucker saying that about Taiwan? Is Tucker saying that about the student demonstrators in Hong Kong? Is Tucker saying that about the South China Sea or the Spratlys?
That's a great
or
point.
the Philippines? I mean, is he saying that about the Chinese incursion into their border with India?
So what's your hypothesis about it?
I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah,
It is an odd. It doesn't, and to the extent of that broader question of when you take the next step and saying, well, who's putting these ideas in Trump's head? Because he doesn't know where the fuck Montenegro is. Is it Tucker? Is it Hannity? Is it Murdoch, Fox writ large? And if so, why? And again, getting to the point where your listeners would actually say, well, this is what we want to hear Pete talk about, because he, has some ability to speak in an educated way about it. To the extent that these are absolutely something that you would want to hear the government of Russia advance, and that their intelligence agencies routinely seek to seed in journalistic outlets around the world, how is it that it has found such a fertile field in the form of Fox News? And why does nobody care?
And so let's now step outside your role as FBI counterintelligence agent, because you are no longer that. And let's posit a citizen CI concern. We don't have the tools of the FBI, but as citizens, we're entitled to have the same concerns, counterintelligence, counterinfluence operation concerns that the FBI would have and call CI matters. What does the public get to do? If we say, okay, Pete, stop doomcasting Bart Gellman's article and talking about Glenn Youngkin, but what do we do about this problem? It's not like Tucker saying these things that should make any counterintelligence professional concerned. We don't have the tools of the Bureau, but we do get to ask questions. What do you do about it as somebody who doesn't have access to the coercive powers of the state?
Stop being apathetic. Get a sense of urgency. Go figure out what it is you can do to get people to vote, to sign up to vote. I mean, at the end of the day, this is all about the vote. If Pennsylvania or Michigan or Arizona is a 51-49%, it's going to be a shit show in 2024. If it is 70-30, it's not. It's not. So the question is, yeah, sure, there may be some states that are truly that close. If you were to mandate, 100% voting of the eligible electorate, there might be some that are that close, but there's some that aren't. So what
was the turnout in Virginia?
I don't know. I mean, was it
blamed
so
on
the good news it was much higher than historically I think it's ever been in an off year. But the bad news is, to Ben's point, when you look at it was greater, but then the far right greater was this compared to the Democrat greater, which was that. So if this is your mean, then this is still a problem. So what you do, get involved and get this.
Okay, well, I'm not.
Those on the far right are approaching
like
these issues as if this is a matter of existential importance. Those on the left are not. in my opinion, in my observation.
Well, that's because they're being paid in like energy drinks and other and like Lululemon.
Well, sure, and until
like,
most of them, if they're right and they're all of a sudden, they're unwanted pregnancy. Either they live in a state where they can get safe legal access to abortion, or they have the money to be able to pay to go somewhere that does. But for the most part, I don't. All of this disproportionately impacts people who are not wealthy, people who are not powerful, and sadly, in many cases, I think those are the constituencies that aren't engaged in the same rate and manner in the political process for a whole bunch of reasons, historical, racial reasons, all kinds of things. And you've got many more experts that you've had on your show than me to talk about that. But the short answer, get involved. Start approaching this with everybody you talk to as if this is a matter of urgency. Sit there and say, if we don't do something now, there's going to be a problem. And I spent 25 years being as calm and cool and just flat as possible because that was the ethos. And you see me worked up, and that should concern you because that's not normal and usual for me. And I'm really that concerned.
All right. Tom McGuckin has stowed the Listerine, and the floor is yours.
Ben, Peter, you've got the best echo chamber. It's great.
Yeah, I know. Peter always liked talking to you. In fact, to everybody. Listen, let's get on to the Ukraine itself, though. I was at a party last night. There was some drinking. But two of my friends are from Ukraine. And they're attorneys here in Santa Fe. But nonetheless, they have family back in Ukraine. And they're super worried. And they said two things to me that I want you to respond to. One, they felt that money that the West, NATO, U.S., with the exception of these javelins, pretty much gets siphoned off. It doesn't go to the army. It gets siphoned off to the oligarchs and people like that. So as far as an army is concerned, they said this, that the first hint of a real invasion, the Ukraine army will just sort of melt away, somewhat like the Afghan security forces. And they brought up the little green men that came in. Remember that when Putin went into Crimea? Okay, that they didn't fight it. They just, come on in. So I guess my question to you is, this sort of has to do with Tucker, but more with just Ukraine. Do you think that that's a reasonable assessment of, look what happened in Afghanistan. This damn thing just fell apart. And do you think Ukraine will just fall apart, just sort of melt, if Putin really decides to do something? And then, two, getting back to Mr. Carlson, what would he say about that?
So I'll caveat this by saying I am not the expert on Ukraine that people like Alex Finman, or even Fiona Hill and others are. My perspective working Ukraine in a counterintelligence context is that there is certainly the amount of corruption and intrigue that swirls around Ukraine is certainly as evident as it is in any of the former Soviet states as it is in Russia. So there is a great deal of, in my experience, corruption, intrigue, the ledgers that allegedly show the payoffs to Manafort, all of that is a very advanced form of sort of corrupt intrigue as I've seen anywhere. I think it's important to remember that this is about Ukraine and Russia, and not the United States, and not Western Europe. And Ukraine and Russia have a very long relationship, and certainly Ukraine has experience of Soviet occupation, of being a Soviet republic. And so I don't think this is something that the average Ukrainian citizen is going to walk into without a sense of the past and an understanding of the past. I think it is very hard. Last I saw, there's some argument whether it was 98,000 troops, with the potential of going up to about 120,000. It doesn't matter what the hell NATO does or the West does. If you get to 120,000 size advance, particularly if you go through Belarus from the north or have a multi-front advance, they're not. Even if people stood up and fought, they're not going to be able to withstand that. I think there is a difference between the population and their motivations and their affiliation and association with Russia when you talk about Eastern Ukraine versus Western Ukraine, particularly in Donbass and Crimea, than there is from the Western Ukrainians. But at the end of the day, if the Russians go in with a force that size, whatever Ukrainian forces do or don't do, I don't think they're going to successfully withstand that. And again, having been occupied by the Soviets, I think they understand well the notion of biding time and what resistance, effective resistance, looks like in the face of something like that. Is what Tucker would say? I don't know. I don't think Tucker Carlson is guided in his statements on air by any grand strategy. I think he is there to get clicks. I think he is there to say anything that will advance the narrative. I used to think he was interested in running. I don't know that he is. I don't think he's dumb, but I don't think what you hear him say is a reflection of whatever his internal beliefs are. I think he's just playing people. And so
he's definitely, by the way, he's definitely not stupid.
Right.
If you go back to his period as a writer at the Weekly Standard before he became he worked with a whole lot of people that are bewildered by what he's become, including, the Bill Cristols and Jonathan Lasts, people who we all know and love. And
I agree.
He is not a stupid person. He's a cynical and evil person. It's quite different.
Exactly, which makes it all the more disappointing. Because if you're not stupid, then you therefore are manipulative and cynical and evil.
I will just say one thing that Alex Vindman has really made a point of about Ukraine's military. It has become a much more capable fighting force over the last 10, 15 years. The question is not whether it can resist a massive full throttle Russian invasion. The question is whether fully armed with the appropriate materials, it can make such an invasion a very painful and protracted process. Maybe not the initial invasion, but whether you could end up with something that would be extremely costly for Putin. And this is, Russia is not a country that is actually economically capable of sustaining a major military confrontation over a long period of time. It's got a GDP the size of Italy.
Right, and it depends, I think, on how brutal Putin wants to be and can be, and I'm not convinced he can be. It's not going to be like the Chechens. I think the prospect of Russian atrocities in Ukraine are much more severe in terms of a response than Chechnya was. But
Paula, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I was wondering if you could explain the psychology of people acting in bad faith or not urgently. And I'll put it into two groups. Like, I'll put Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz to one side, who I don't really understand why they feel the need to degrade and deface themselves as Yale and Harvard Law School graduates who clerked on SCOTUS and make themselves look like idiots, at least to the smart people that they were educated around. I don't see what's psychologically advantageous about that. And on the left, I made this point the other day, the fact that, to me, a 21-year-old female liberal, I think Bill Kristol is more on point on the urgency of democracy than politicians who are Democrats in the House and Senate comes off quite strange to me. And I think they know that living in an authoritarian regime isn't fun. So I'm not sure on the left where the lack of urgency comes from.
Yeah. Are you one of the people in Michigan, by the way?
Yes, that is me.
Yay, go Blue. Big Ten champion University of Michigan Wolverines playing in the BCS. I just have to plug Michigan, so go Blue. I think for Hawley and Cruz, it is a bald, purely political set of motivations. They are, in my opinion, playing to what they see as their base as a means to both maintain their electoral status within their states, as well as to pivot and access those areas of power that they might get outside of their states. I don't think there is any ideological basis in their minds for what they're saying. I think it's got to be the most awkward holiday party when every Supreme Court justice gets all their former clerks together and Hawley and Cruz walk into the room and they're the turd in the punch bowl in both appearance and spirit.
I have to say, I do think that John Roberts, who is a man of a lot of dignity, I mean, you can say what you want about his politics or his judicial philosophy, but he's a very dignified fellow, and he has a sense of decorum, and he must cringe every day about Josh Hawley.
Yeah, of course. And I think, and a lot of people, a lot of the seniors, I think a lot of elder statesmen in the Republican Party, Cruz was always an asshole, from what I've heard and read and heard from others. And that was pretty transparent from day one, and nobody likes him, and that is what it is. But I think a lot of Republican elder statesmen, that, you know, John Roberts among them, but also people more on the legislative side and the pure political side, put a lot of effort and their imprimatur on Josh Hawley, and I think have been extraordinarily disappointed by his little fist pump to the insurrectionists on the morning of January 6th and what he's become. I don't have any sympathy for him. It's kind of tragic, but again, I think their motivations are just purely cravenly political. And you know, what that says about a current political process, that, you know, they could have been somebody like, you know, any number of former senators. That's not the political environment.
Just to be clear, Ben, your statement about Roberts and Hawley is that Hawley was like one of his clerks?
Hawley
Right, yeah,
clerk for the Chief Justice. And it wasn't,
it wasn't
even that
but
long ago. I mean,
yeah,
Hawley's
I mean,
so
it
young.
couldn't be.
Sorry.
No. I was just going to say that one of the things that you have to realize as a Supreme Court justice, frankly, is that you are obviously going to be like benighting people to go out and like either someday be Supreme Court justices themselves, or like to do exactly what Josh Hawley did. I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I've just like been in the hiring process for clerks at many stages, and I've had many friends that have clerked for the Supreme Court, and like, it's just like I just think that like Roberts had, if he didn't know, then he feels misled. Like, I mean, like, or he doesn't care, like, or he knows that might be what he's like creating, and he like is at peace with it. He's just not, he knows, that's all.
I guarantee there's no way he's at peace. But to Ben's point, like much like Tucker Carlson, what that showed, I mean, Cruz and Hawley are really smart. And they're really smart.
All right, so here, Christopher Argyris gets the last question today, and then I have, on behalf of Genevieve De La Fera, a piece of business to conduct with Mr. Strzok.
All right. So I'll try to keep it short. I was trying to think of a metaphor for what Trump and Devin Nunes are up to with their social media venture, and I thought of the producers, you know, the musical or movie. So I'm thinking that this is a grift. This is just a way to put money in their pocket. Whether it fails or not, they're going to attract all these donations. It can't seriously compete with Twitter or Facebook or whatever the other all the other ventures that have taken those guys on and failed. So, what do you think ultimately Trump and Nunes are up to with this Trump media enterprise, whatever it's called?
Money. I do agree it's grift. I think they are motivated. I mean, there's a certain amount of goodwill, and I mean that in a legal sense. The Trump name, in the context of something you might bring to a multimedia platform, does have some value, because there are all these knuckleheads following him who will gravitate to a platform if it works. And so I do think there is money to be made there. I think there's this entire ecosystem. I mean, look at it. You know, Sidney Powell allegedly is under investigation for like fundraising for all these like, you know, Fight Back and all the Kraken lawsuits about, you know, challenging the vote and whether or not she was taking the money and siphoning it off. And all these people, everywhere you look, everybody's got, the kind of, the January 6th version of a nutritional supplement that they're trying to sell, whoever it is. So at the end of the day, I think it's all about money and grift. I think it always has been. I think at the end of the day, there is no sort of message other than we're you and we're fighting for you and you need to get up and fight, and so sign up for my newsletter and donate $5 here. I don't know. The producers is very highbrow. I would probably go with Dumb and Dumber a little bit, although there's a certain nobility in his romantic pursuit in the movie, but it's not serious. There's nothing serious with Donald Trump at the head of an enterprise and Devin Nunes as the CEO or CEO or whatever the heck he's supposed to be. That's not how you build an effective enterprise. That's all show. It's all grift. So yeah, it's fool and their money are soon parted, right? So,
all right. I will just say that the producers, for those of you who've never seen the original movie, The Producers, I believe, is the first comedy about the Holocaust. It was made in 1968, which is remarkably soon after the end of World War II. It's not really about the Holocaust, it's about Hitler, though. It is brilliant and incredibly transgressive in a way that Josh Hawley could never hope to be, because he's not imaginative enough to transgress.
He's busy with his porn and his video games.
Yes, that's right.
Facebook,
I mean,
right?
he's busy giving away. He's busy giving away too much
Allegedly.
About his private life.
He's
Not
leaking. I
not
thought he was
literally.
leaking masculinity out his ears.
I mean, he is. I mean,
On his little chair, on his little tiny little infant.
He would not have the stones to wear a fluffy poodle shirt, and I'm just saying.
Ben, God, don't, do not, no. That is
He
not.
doesn't want you to conflate.
Lead with your
comfortability
strengths, and then.
masculinity.
Wait, we're going with. Would you think
Is this a
more
poll?
highly of Josh Hawley if he put on a fluffy poodle shirt? Yes or no? All right, we're going to do that.
And the following question, would you feel more vindicated if Josh Hawley put on a poodle shirt? Yes or no?
Okay. So far, no is kicking ass on this. All right. GDF Pete has instructed me to not let you off the show without a commitment of the name of a charity and an amount of money that the In Lieu of Fun, the Greek chorus, can raise for that charity. That if it happens, you will do Where's the Lie in a dog shirt on In Lieu of Fun.
I have a charity. You want an amount.
Do you want to wait? Just link my tip jar, Ben. Just link
An
that.
amount. I see, and this. No, I got to think about this because there are 100 worthwhile charities that I would do a lot for. I do not want to put a price on it for the In Lieu of Fun chorus and audience.
Oh, okay. So you don't have to do we'll just raise money. And then you'll do it whether we make a target or not. And that's fine.
Oh no, there's a ground floor to putting on a dog shirt.
I can't believe how
it's easily. I don't know that it is in the 5-figure. It might be in the 6-figure range. Just in complete transparency here, and it's all for a good cause. But you have no sense of my
this is motivation. Like a 6-figure amount to put on a dog shirt? Like, would that I had such standards for anything I do in my life. Like,
maybe we need to make a dog shirt NFT and auction it off.
Yeah.
I don't think there's like a single thing I know
for
like 6
I know
figures.
artists who have been extraordinarily gifted artists who have been successful in the NFT environment. But no, I need to think this through because if I delve into either the charity fundraising and or the dog shirt world, it's going to be a fucking show.
Well,
so
we just wanna, next time you come on the show, you need to have thought about this and be ready to name your charity, or we'll do it offline and figure it out. But think about it. There is so much opportunity for goodness here, Pete. Think about
it's a great cause, and it's a great charity. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of great charities, but that's easy. It's the dog shirt.
All right, we're gonna leave it there. Pete continues to be irrationally threatened by dog shirts. The results of the poll are quite striking. 89% of you would not think better of Josh Hawley if he put on a fluffy poodle shirt. I just want to say you're all wrong, because if Josh Hawley were actually willing to put on a fluffy poodle shirt, it would show he is capable of humor and self-mockery, which are two things that we do not know about him today. And I would personally at least be able to say, well, look, he's an anti-democratic asshole, but he's capable of smirking and giggling at himself, and that's at least 0.5% redemptive. We are going to leave it there. Pete Strzok, you're a great American, even if you're in a panic attack today.
Yeah, you seemed very nervous.
We will be...
It's not, existential threat need not generate panic. It's just deep concern.
We're going to be back tomorrow. We're going to be here with Claire Walensky, who will be joining us from Paris. And that will be 22 hours and 53 minutes from now. And until then, Pete. Until then, Kate.
Oh, you asking me? Oh shit! I get to do this? I didn't know I didn't know the audience got to do it. So, in lieu of, since we can't have fun anymore, instead we are all going to find out in our communities what we can do to get people engaged.
No, you're all going to go and watch the classic 1962 movie, The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming.
Now, instead, watch the classic 1968 movie,
The Producers. Right?
The Producers. It is actually manages, lo these many years later, to be genuinely shocking.